Hello, I'm Josh Strifehays. I've made a lot of videos on MMORPGs. There's a running joke that I've even killed a few because my videos seem to release just before they shut down, but that's actually just a coincidence and legally you can't prove otherwise. So I'm used to being there at the end of an MMO's life cycle, but recently I was invited to be there for the birth of one. I was one of 3 content creators, along with CohhCarnage and JoCat, invited to stream the first public look at the as of yet unnamed MMO currently known as Project Ghost. It's being made by fantastic Pixel Castle, which is a new studio containing some MMO industry veterans. On stream, we played through one of the blue zones and we were joined by designer Greg Street, more often known as Ghostcrawler. We had a lot of input, the audience had a lot of questions, and Greg responded to all of it. Some of his answers were better than others. But ultimately, I have concerns. I have apprehensions. I have extremely cautious optimism because honestly, I think it was too early to show anything public. And in this video, I'll explain why. So what is Project Ghost? Who are the people making it? Is it actually an MMORPG at all? Let's find out. As usual, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep this channel alive. More information on how you can support at the end. For now, let's begin. And let's begin with the team at Fantastic Pixel Castle. This studio was founded in 2023, so relatively recently. They're entirely focused on making an MMORPG currently known as codenamed Ghost. The game director is Greg Street. This guy started working games as a designer on Age of Empires, then went on to become the lead system designer of a small MMO called World of Warcraft, most notably Wrath of the Lich King. Greg even mentions he helped design Dungeon and Raid Finder, which is a choice he often questions. Greg then worked on the speculated League of Legends MMORPG before leaving and starting to work on this one. Andrew Medlin is an engineer who worked on Call of Duty. Brian Halinka is a gameplay design director who worked on Homefront and World of Warcraft. They have engineers on their team from Ubisoft, business VPs from Overwatch, user experience directors from League of Legends, and community managers from the Pokemon Company. So Fantastic Pixel Castle aren't a bunch of amateurs. They're a highly experienced team of industry professionals with MMO knowledge both wide and deep, which is why my expectations for this test were very, very high. Now, I had played an extremely early beta build of this game about a year ago, but there was nothing unique or interesting about that build. It was a private test, more a proof of technical ability to host the framework of an MMO. This public reveal test, however, this was the first time everyone else would be seeing what Project Ghost was, so this kind of mattered. The footage you'll be seeing in this video is a mix of my own Twitch stream, JoCat's stream, and CohhCarnage's stream. I'll be critiquing the graphics, combat, gameplay loop, and player interaction and explaining specific mechanics later. Let's start with the game's narrative. Ghost, as it currently stands, and remember this can all change, has you play as a Radiant, a powerful adventurer with a connection to the inherent magic of this world. There are currently 4 classes we'll touch on later, but this is a class-based game. Your adventure will be focused around the hub city or floating island of Haven. The world has been fractured into many different shards. You can see them in the skybox, and traveling to these shards and the adventures on them is the main draw of the game. From there, Ghost has 2 major design roads, red zones and blue zones. Red zones will be your traditional MMORPG design of a shared public world. You leave the city into a red zone and everyone can see you there. Despite being called red zones, they are nothing to do with PvP or danger levels. It's just how Ghost is referring to classical design. So a red zone designed game would be EverQuest, World of Warcraft, RuneScape, basically non-instanced public content where the story and the overworld mob hunting or boss killing happens. You want a traditional MMO experience, you will be playing a red zone. But then there are also blue zones, and that's what we're playing through in this footage. A blue zone is a randomly generated instanced zone which requires a party to complete. You team up, then use this big rock to select a blue zone, jump onto this skyship, and you are narratively flown to a blue shard to start the zone. Blue zones all start with you on this ship. You jump down, we'll talk about the glide feature later, then you work your way through the blue zone, killing enemies, collecting loot, find the boss, kill it, and leave. Think of it as similar to dungeoneering in RuneScape or the island expeditions in World of Warcraft, basically a big, currently outdoored tile-set private dungeon. If everyone leaves a blue zone, it ceases to exist. Blue zones can be affected by modifiers called echoes, which can affect enemy damage, player health or speed, environment loot. They're basically general modifiers that you set before the blue zone starts. Experience and levels gained in either blue or red zones are permanent, so you can level up in either, and equipment is permanent too. However, as we'll see soon, blue zones do have some interesting temporary mechanics which makes them similar to roguelikes in design. Progress through Ghost will need you to play through both designed elements, the red zones and the blue zones, as some story beats will take you to both, and some resources will only be available playable in one or the other. One of the guiding design tenets that Greg has repeated seems to be putting the multiplayer back into MMO. Now, I'm a big supporter of solo content within MMOs because a lot of players like to exist in a thriving world without being forced to interact with other players. So that's one of my first bit of frictions with Ghost. Greg has said several times, why would you want to play an MMO solo? And I've literally made a video explaining why people do that. So while I admire the purity of keeping MMOs massively multiplayer, I think solo players make up a larger portion of this genre than some people see and will need to be considered. So that's the basics. Big unique IP world split into shards, red zone, classical, public, MMO, blue zone, randomly generated mini-zones. I personally refer to the blue zones as effectively dungeons generated from a bank of different assets to be slightly different every time, and while some of the members of Fantastic Pixel Castle didn't appreciate my very reductive way of describing blue zones, that's currently what they are. And that phrase, currently what they are, is probably the linchpin of this review, because as a critic, I cannot critique potential or promises or future plans. I can definitely say if something sounds like a good or bad idea, but personally I'm a more mechanical, pedantic reviewer. I want to dive into the specifics, the numbers, the systems. So let's critique everything I actually got to play today, and then I'll explain why doing that wasn't easy at all. Ghost currently has 4 playable classes, a tank, healer, ranged magic DPS, and melee DPS. When CohhCarnage, JoCat, and myself played a brief technical setup test before the live stream started, I decided to play as the tank class. And I quickly learned the tank class is bad. As in, it isn't finished. It has no mass aggro grabbing ability, no short-term high defense shield, and no personal sustainability. You are absolutely reliant on a healer to constantly heal you because the enemy damage isn't balanced yet, and if you're doing that, you may as well just play a melee DPS whom is being healed. JoCat then tried playing the tank class, and he agrees it wasn't able to actually tank anything. The test zone we played through was, due to the echoes we randomly got, so hard we were not able to finish it, and this led to a brief marketing chat. For the public stream, I believe you should want to show the best your game has to offer. You don't get a second chance at a first impression, and if the stream had seen how much we were struggling with that off-stream zone we did first, it would have looked incredibly clunky. I mentioned to Fantastic Pixel Castle maybe curating a zone specifically for us to show off on stream, to show the best the game currently has. But Fantastic Pixel Castle actually pushed back. They were confident in their random generation algorithm and wanted to test it. And the difficulty we got was just an outlier. So I'll hand it to them. They do have confidence in their product. They weren't curating anything for this stream, and they were willing to see what they had and what it could do. The other classes are the Tempest, a ranged magic DPS, they're a storm mage, and a ranged healer, the Songbird, which is basically a better bard. The melee fighter is the Dreamblade, so for the public reveal, none of us used the tank because it can't actually tank. The most fleshed out class is the Greatsword using Dreamblade, a melee DPS, so I go with that one. So does Cohh. Now don't worry too much about the user interface, the buttons and the general heads-up display layout, because this is all still subject to change. The art isn't final. Do remember, this is an incredibly early build. You have a minimap to the top right featuring Fog of War, which is removed by exploring, an objective panel for the current blue zone on the central right, and extra objectives could be revealed if you find certain random events happening. Then to the bottom you've got your own health bar and your team's health bar, your magic points and your experience to the next level. All pretty standard so far. To the bottom right are your abilities. I ask if they want input or critique on this and get reminded this is just a beta, not a finished product by a long shot, so they're not looking for specific feedback on the UI design. They're more bothered about the mechanical playstyle. Combat is tab target but with action lock on, so attacks will go toward whatever you are looking at if you're not locked on to anything. Exactly like switching to action cam in Guild Wars 2, which is fine. I don't mind this combat style. For combat, most classes have a builder, an ability which gains a resource like stamina or magic points, then a spender, an ability which does more damage and spends the resource you have built. The Dreamblade has a 4-hit melee combo as standard, then a whirlwind AoE spin attack, an attack which stuns a single target, or a big flashy blade smash ultimate. These abilities aren't final, and so critique of them mechanically isn't needed as much yet, but they did want to know which ones feel fun to use, and honestly, all are fine. If you've played the Barbarian, previously known as the Great Weapon Fighter in Neverwinter Online, you know exactly what it feels like to play a Dreamblade. I spend some time attacking the training dummies and try to work out the optimal rotation. What does the most DPS? Because this is the kind of pedantic critique I like to do. I ask the team if they've done the calculations to balance the classes, and no, they haven't yet. Final damage numbers is a future thing, so no critique really needed here. For this test build, we were able to open our inventory and swap between the 4 classes whenever we wanted to, but if we did that, we would lose any experience we had gained. At such a low level, that wasn't really a problem. I don't think this will be in the final build. So while the inventory's open, let's have a look at it. You've got your usual inventory slots, then your equipment. If you pick up a potion, it's automatically added to a hotbar bound to 5 and 6, as seen in the bottom left. We'll look at the other hotbar buttons soon. And my main critique of the inventory is I went to click and drag an item just to test if click and drag worked, and I instinctively left-clicked to drag the item, which here is actually drop item. So I just threw my potions on the ground. Right-click is drag or equip. I give feedback that maybe left-click should be bound to drag, not drop, and again, the key bindings aren't final. I suggested having a context menu pop up when you right-click an item, similar to how RuneScape does it, and that was convenient because at this point on stream, the official old-school RuneScape account joined in to watch. The MMO genre is pretty tight-knit, and most of the studios do support each other, but it's always lovely to see it happen live. So we enter a blue zone on a skyship and jump on down, press space to jump, and space again while in the air to activate your Halo glider, which all Radiants have. There is fall damage, so gliding is kind of important. Gliding is always fun, but there's no denying it. 4 people dropping from the sky, gliding down, feels very Fortnite. Combined with the art style, and a new mechanic that we'll see later, and a lot of people did say, this looks a bit like Fantasy Fortnite, and I know that because I am a lot of people. We land on the ground and activate our first Radiant feat, and this is probably my favourite aspect of the blue zones. At the start of a blue zone, and after finding a secret area or defeating a zone mini-boss, you will get a Radiant feat, a power-up which will last for the rest of this specific blue zone, such as more damage, more health, higher crit chance, slow healing, and by gathering a lot of Radiant feats, you'll eventually be powerful enough to face the zone boss. Now, I like the idea behind Radiant feats because I like games like Vampire Survivors, which are all about starting as a specific class and then slowly building into a really overpowered killing machine using whatever you are randomly lucky enough to find. And almost any build can work, you just adopt your gameplay style to it. Mobile games like Archero giving powerful attack or defense upgrades, changing how you play wave to wave. Even the Dominion Tower in RuneScape, which is a boss rush with buffs and debuffs after each fight. The blue zone being effectively a small slice of the main game means that it is the perfect place to play around with random mechanics like this. To me, the strength of blue zones is that they are temporary dungeons, and so the Radiant feat system actually plays very well into this temporary strength. I'm not a fan of borrowed power in MMORPGs. Having your powerful weapon taken away or your stats reset every expansion can suck, because you've put a lot of effort and time into getting them. But blue zones and this roguelike Radiant feat system are designed to only be 30 to 40 minute adventures, so could play very well with temporary upgrades. There's potential for more. If you find the same Radiant feat and take it 100 times, could you unlock it for use in the red zone? There's a lot you could do with this system. The system has potential, but that word potential, that's a roadblock for me as a critic, because Radiant feats could be awesome, but currently they aren't. They are things like do 5% more damage, or 2% increased critical chance, or your ultimate attack charges to full if you drop below 30% health, which are things I just don't notice happening. It's not like I kill a boss, get a 5% damage feat, and then go to take on another boss and think, oh wow, yeah, I can really feel this extra 5% damage. This has really enhanced my gameplay experience. This has changed me. Which is a shame, because Radiant feats could change your gameplay experience. Good mechanics are often risk and reward. The greater the risk, the greater the reward, and currently the feats aren't doing that. I even asked the staff who are currently in the stream what their favorite Radiant feat is, and one of the staff members said there is a feat where you do more damage the lower your health is, and everyone enjoys that, and I can tell why they enjoy it, because it's the perfect example of risk and reward. So the Radiant feat system is great, but right now it doesn't explore what it could truly be. So I ask if they want feedback on specific Radiant feats, and again, it's not a finished system, so critique of the specifics isn't needed. So we grab some feats, go and kill some local mobs, and end up running quite a distance between fights. Now, to be fair, combat feels decent. It's smooth, nicely animated. There are a few too many effects which overlap and make it feel a tad chaotic, and I can't really see what I personally am doing, but the flow is there. If you've ever been involved in a Guild Wars 2 world boss, which always becomes a massive Zerg rush of players just spamming their rotation, all knowing they are adding to the overall damage, but not knowing what they personally are responsible for, it feels a bit like that. The distance between mobs, however, is a bit too long, so I ask if mob placement is finalized, and again, no, mob placement is decided randomly but within specific confines, like lower level mobs are closer to the start of the zone and higher level ones roam around the edge of it. But the placement isn't finalized, so I can't critique it, and then I suddenly realize what this public demo is. This is just a bad version of Elden Ring Night Rain. Small groups of players all start high in the sky, drop and glide into a landmass which was randomly generated from a bunch of pre-made assets, then they kill lower level mobs to find equipment and gain experience, then take down a mini-boss and get rewarded with a temporary buff which lasts for that mission, complete optional events if you have time, then group up to take on the mission boss. The Blue Zone Echo modifiers are similar to the random events or shifting Earth of Night Rain, although that affects the map more. Now, I'm not saying this is bad design. I quite like Elden Ring Night Rain, but it's odd to see that Fantastic Pixel Castle have accidentally recreated the Night Rain gameplay loop without realizing it. Eventually, we find a note from an NPC which explains more about why we are here, and honestly, it was very underwhelming. I was told the narrative was going to be strong, but what I read was quite dry text. So I ask, is this the final text? And again, no, because it was a placeholder until the narrative team come in and flesh it out. So critique of this wasn't really a focus. And at this point, I've got to be honest with you, I wasn't annoyed, I was confused. So I sent a message to the Fantastic Pixel Castle team asking one simple question. Why am I here? This stream wasn't a fundraiser or a Kickstarter, because as it says on their website, they are fully funded externally. It wasn't a pre-release hype builder, because they keep reminding us it's nowhere near done. It wasn't a public sale, because you can't pre-order even if you wanted to. You can't give them money in any way. So this wasn't a marketing stream. The build isn't close enough to have finished assets or systems, so it's not a balanced stream either, and there were no major hype moments, so it's not a hype stream. Hi, Editing Josh here. Literally while editing this video, a Bloomberg report came out all about the game developer Dreamhaven and how two of their games have recently underperformed, neither making as much money as expected. And this matters to Project Ghost because both Dreamhaven and Fantastic Pixel Castle are partially funded by NetEase. The report then goes on to mention that NetEase, due to these failures, may need to reassess funding to several future projects, and Project Ghost may be one of them. NetEase released a statement on this and said it is our responsibility as a business to regularly assess the progress, viability, and potential success of all our games and studios, and to make decisions based on those business considerations. So while Fantastic Pixel Castle and Project Ghost are currently funded by NetEase, that may change. I hope it doesn't, because I think this project does have a good future, but I am at least aware of this. Now, I am a very pedantic critic who focuses on critiquing design and systems, and none of the designs or systems are finished yet, so I didn't have anything to pedantically critique. My skill set was seemingly not very useful at this point in time. I played the game, they asked for feedback, and when I said, this bit isn't good, I was met with, yes, well, it's not finished. But there's only so many times I can hear that without asking, well, what is finished to such a degree that it could be considered worth critiquing as if it was live? And the answer is, currently, nothing. So after this stream had finished, I hopped on a call with Fantastic Pixel Castle and basically asked, what can I do for you? Because I thought I was here to critique a product, and after talking for a while, I've come to understand my position a lot better. Ghost isn't finished. Nothing is finalized. Nothing is balanced. Animations are somewhat set, but could be changed. Even the trees in the city hub are placeholder assets from a store, not custom made. Enemies currently do not have roaming ranges because they in fact cannot roam right now, which is why they're all stood in clumps waiting for a player to attack them. The Radiant feats aren't balanced because they haven't been fully created. Nothing is at a stage where it needs polishing. The purpose of this test was to show the extremely early stages of the process, and what you are seeing is 18 months of work, which, to be fair, is a very impressive standard for only a year and a half. They have several years left to go, but for 18 months, this is quite good. My job was not to critique the specifics, but to instead look at the overall design ideas and say which one I think is worth following, which thread is worth pulling on because players might like it. For example, the Radiant Feat system. I wasn't brought in to critique the exact things the feats did, but to say if a feat system like this has potential and would work at all. I wasn't brought in to critique the DPS balance of the Dreamblades combo versus using the Dreamblades abilities, but to see if making the Dreamblade was a good idea at all. I wasn't here to critique Ghost as a finished product, but to say what I could see within this very early mixing bowl of ideas would one day condense into a solid, fun gameplay loop. This is far more big picture stuff than I usually do. I mean, hell, in my Neverwinter Hordes of the Underdark video, I critiqued the icons of potion bottles not being lined up evenly in the inventory. I'm that kind of pedant. Ghost needed me to zoom out more than I usually do, which I find difficult because I can't review potential. I can only review what I can actually play. My concern about this process is these systems, these elements of design, such as the Radiant Feats, they shouldn't be left up to public preference, because while most players are experts at saying what they don't like, they're actually terrible at then fixing it. The classic saying is a camel is a horse designed by committee, because everyone is trying to add something they feel would work, but when you look at it all together, it doesn't. It's like the episode of The Simpsons where Homer designs a car and adds everything, or the Itchy and Scratchy focus group where the kids want a down-to-earth realistic episode which also features aliens and robots and crazy fantasy things, and the marketing executives get annoyed because they can't give them both of those things, but the kids do want both those things, just as players do want lots of stuff, but like a pizza with every single topping, lots of stuff together doesn't always work. I would personally feel more comfortable with a team who know exactly what they want the game to be and are looking for feedback to refine within that framework, not a team asking how the framework should look before they begin refining. We spend some more time progressing through the blue zone and, oh hey, what's that little hammer icon bound to be? What does that do? Well, remember when I said some people, me, compared Ghost to Fortnite? B is the building mechanic. You collect resources by chopping trees or mining rocks and then build stuff. Now remember, this is a blue zone, so it's all temporary. But you can build health fonts, mana refill points, stairs, walls, little huts. You get the idea. In an almost 2-hour stream, we collectively, as a team, built one thing, just to show the building mechanic off. This ramp, which allowed us to run up and over the barricade of an enemy camp, which didn't actually negate any mechanics because the camp didn't have a gate. If my job is to say which design elements are worth putting time into and which aren't, I am not a fan of building mechanics like this, and I don't believe they would be integrated into the core gameplay loop well. If you don't need to use them to finish a blue zone, people won't use them. If you do need to use them, people will interact with them the bare minimum to get to the combat, which is quite good. Building is unlikely to be included in a red zone as they are public, and public buildings in MMOs always turn into dicks. So you don't want that to be happening. And having a big system like building only available in one specific game mode, blue zones, of your MMO seems like a waste of design time. There is a reason dungeoneering in RuneScape is basically abandoned. I personally love it, not enough people did. We make more progress, find the boss and kill it. In combat, you also have 2 dodges which recharge, currently bound to control. Again, think of the dodge mechanic in Guild Wars 2, basically the same. We take the boss down, get some loot, finish the blue zone, and get sent back to the hub city, and that's a blue zone. That's done. CohhCarnage and I then take this teleporter to the top of a hill, and if you dodge and then hold control while heading downhill, you'll summon your Halo glider as a board and skate down the hill. This is a great mechanic. Keep this. Please add some checkered flags in so we can race. So now you've played a blue zone and seen most of what they had for us in this public reveal demo. What are my thoughts on Ghost? I want to start with things I like, but the problem with this is nothing is finalized. So I cannot say, I really like how you've done this thing specifically, because nothing specific is finished. I can only say, I like that you are exploring the concept of this, or the design space of that. And as a critic, this feels a bit too wishy-washy. It feels too general. It'd be like saying, I like that your game has combat. It's not personal enough to be relevant to this game. I like the idea of radiant feats, but I don't yet like any specific one. I like the idea of builders and spenders as a combat mechanic because almost every game has it, but as of yet I don't see any specific building and spending combo that really speaks to me. Ironically, the thing I liked the most, the one specific aspect, was a bug. If you jump in the air as the Tempest Storm Mage and then keep casting your basic attack, you don't fall down and just kind of float around like an angry storm cloud, maintaining any angular momentum that you had when you were jumping. This wasn't meant to happen, but I loved it. Keep it. Build an entire combat style around being a mage who jumps in the air and then keeps themselves afloat by pure damage output. That would be lovely. If there is one impact I have on this game, Floaty Storm Mage would be it. So how was my play experience overall? Making an MMORPG is an incredibly difficult, long-term, and expensive thing. It's risky, and only the really, really passionate even think about trying to do it, let alone make a studio to actually do it. So I have a great deal of both professional and personal respect for the team at Fantastic Pixel Castle. They've all got experience with MMOs, they're not naive, they're going into this eyes open at the difficulty of this project. They want to be completely transparent and open with the process of making an MMO, showing you everything from the early concepts to the final piece, and this will take years. They want to show you the reality of the process. And from a personal, community-focused point, that's a lovely idea. But I think the extremely early build we played for this public reveal wasn't refined enough to make a strong first impression. You can say, this is an early build. We're still years away from release. As many times as you like, there will still be those who see this build and think it's finished, or near to, and they judge the game from that. You're never going to be able to get away from that, and while yes, they may be wrong for doing it, from a marketing point of view, you don't get a second chance at a first impression. Saying you are going to make a brand new MMORPG focused on multiplayer interaction with this epic story and cool classes and interesting worlds, then showing a 30-minute randomly generated roguelike gameplay element slice where nothing is finalized and none of the epic story is continued, feels like you're going for two different demographics. You're advertising at the people that want a long-term classic MMO, but showing gameplay that appeals to people that want short-term mission-based gameplay. The blue zones may only be a part of the final product, but as it stands, they are all of your marketing, which is what the average player is going to see and judge the game from. CohhCarnage, JoCat and I briefly messaged after the stream. JoCat has put out a great video on his channel discussing his thoughts on Project Ghost, and I think JoCat is slightly more positive about this than I am. Coh and I seem to share similar thoughts in relation to this being a very early, possibly too early build to really highlight what Ghost is. It's kind of like saying you're building a brand new motorcycle, then for your first reveal, showing a sidecar for the motorcycle, with the justification that, hey, some people might like this, and yeah, they probably will, but it's a bit too far from what people were expecting. I think Project Ghost has a lot of good ideas, but they are not yet refined into a balanced playable experience enough to be something I can personally critique in a style which plays to my strengths. I think Red Zones, the classic MMO experience, and Blue Zones, temporary randomly generated roguelike dungeons, will appeal to different players, and starting with Blue Zones as a marketing reveal was a bold and possibly harmful choice. Because there's a paradox in marketing. The more stuff you include doesn't necessarily mean you appeal to more people. It actually means you appeal to less. The people who want to play Red Zones are not going to want to be forced to do Blue Zones, and vice versa. So doubling your gameplay loops doesn't necessarily double your player base. If anything, you have hyper-focused on the Venn diagram of people who both like long-term MMORPGs and people who like temporary roguelike randomly generated dungeons. I think ultimately the team behind Ghost are capable of making an MMORPG. But remember, hype has a 6-month incubation time. If you get people interested in something, if it's not out within 6 months, they will move on, and Ghost will absolutely not be out within 6 months. So this isn't about hype, it's about transparency in the process, which some people just won't understand. The building mechanics I don't care for at all, but that's just a personal preference. I don't think this will be super popular with modern MMO players. As it stands, I am very, very cautiously optimistic about Ghost. I'll check in several months or years and see if anything is refined enough that I can get pedantic with it. Until then, I'll be watching and hoping that they do it right. Cheers for watching. As usual, a massive thank you to the supporters on Patreon who keep the channel alive. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and our Discord. And as always, have a great day.